every action begins here in Gasho with Namu, Myo, Ho, Ren, Ge, Kyo. Namu, Myo, Ho, Ren, Ge, Kyo. The last one is Namu, Myo, Ho, Ren, Ge, Kyo. So it's Namu, Myo, Ho, getting rid of negativity. Namu, Myo, bringing in the Buddha's blessing. Okay. Namu, Myo, sorry. Namu, Ren, Ge, Kyo. And this is, I hold the Buddha up, put the Buddha's feet, hold the Buddha's feet with me. So we can start. It gets a little crazy the faster you go. Namu, Myo, Ho, Ren, Ge, Kyo. 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 Last one. Namu, Myo, Ho, Ren, Ge, Kyo. Namu, Myo, Ho, Ren, Ge, Kyo. Namu, Myo, Ho, Ren, Ge, Kyo.
I'm nervous.
You're nervous?
Yeah, because of this.
It's very interesting how much, how difficult it can be to keep it going without getting.
To be concentrated.
Oh, your left foot. Yes.
And Françoise.
Or something.
Françoise over there.
Rub your hands together. And then- So we're awake now. So that also illustrates the beauty of chanting together, and not just as a solo practice, but I will get into that as we go along. I think the best place to start is with my story. I was born in Japan, and at about age 2, my parents brought me to the United States, and my father is in the military, and my mother is Japanese. So our lives were based on traveling to military base after another. And so because I am of mixed ethnicity, it was quite a struggle to be in America. On a military base, it was quite safe because we were all foreigners in someone else's country, so we could say, well, we're all Americans together and no big deal. But once coming back to mainland America, things were a little bit more difficult. And I could truthfully say that, I lived in New York, then we went to Germany, then we came back to Texas, and that was where I had my first real experience of racism, was from my teacher, who called me the bad word in class one time. And of course, I did not know what that meant. All I knew was that this mad woman had accosted me so verbally, and I was afraid to tell my father because I thought I had done something horribly wrong. And that's why she talked to me that way, because I didn't know what it meant. I didn't tell my father until I was 18 years old. And my father was the type of person that you mess with his kids, you might die, kind of thing. And he was also fairly violent in terms of domestic violence and spankings. I mean, he was raised that way, so that continued. So I had a lot of questions. And as I've told some of you, I fell in love with Audrey Hepburn in the Nun story, so I wanted to become a nun. And Jesus in the King of Kings, the MGM version of Jesus was quite beautiful. And so I became very devout. I would read the Bible constantly because I was searching. And I would read it cover to cover and say it's a bunch of nonsense. And I would go to church and I would ask people questions, and it was like, we don't ask those questions. You just must have faith. And I was about 11 when, in Texas, my mother's friend invited her to go to a Buddhist meeting. And my mother hates religion, so she refused to go, but I was allowed to go. And of course, my mother said to me, do not join anything. So you know what that does. So when I walked into this room, it was filled with all these Japanese people who were chanting these words, and the incense was just all over the place. And I immediately felt at home. And I thought, okay, I'll join. I didn't believe anything they told me, because it was so fantastic. People would say things like, I've been in America 3 months and I now speak English. And I said, that's impossible. But it didn't matter. It's just this feeling that I had of being at home. So I received at that time a scroll, which is the omandala of the group known today as Soka Gakkai. It was nichiren-shu of America back then. And it was only put together by these women, Japanese women, all married to Americans. So we would go to meetings in their homes, and all of us children were just kind of raised with these women showing us how to practice. There was no education in Buddhism in the sense of book learning. You just chanted. Anytime you had a problem, they would say, go chant about it. Whatever you wanted to do, just chant about it. So that's all I ever did until I was about 18, and when I went away to college, then I met other Buddhists. And I thought they were actually my idea of what a Nazi youth corps would look like. Because Soka Gakkai is pretty awesome when you think about the things they were able to do. But people used to do washoi, and everybody wore, uniforms and things, so it seemed kind of antithetical to what I thought Buddhism was about, and as a kind of hippie styled person, non-conforming, I wasn't going to do that. But there was a tremendous amount of protection surrounding my life, even as I encountered different things that, the university where I went, every semester that new women came in, all the pimps would come on campus, because the campus was right in the middle of the city, and essentially go shopping to see who they could turn out. My story was quite a bit different because my roommate recognized how dumb I was about life and had a friend of hers look after me. And he was a pimp, and he had women in his stable, I guess you'd call it. But because of being so naive, I trusted him, and he couldn't get over the fact that I trusted him. So he never did anything. He tried to really protect me from everything and introduced me. He showed me the life that these women were living. And it was just horrible on one hand. For some of them, it was, they seemed to just go along with it, you know, however. So I was always protected, and I noticed that in my life, there were different circumstances where I should have either been killed or something horrible happened, and somehow I always found the protection that I needed. And gradually, I decided to participate with the organization, and I'm still very skeptical. I'm not going to do it your way, I'm going to do it my way. Very hard learned lesson for all of us that it's not the path that changes, it's we who must change, right? So eventually, I remained with Soka Gakkai for 36 years. And at about that time is when the whole thing exploded between Soka Gakkai and nichiren-shu, and they separated. And I was so concerned because they were not following the path. They were not walking the walk and talking the talk. So I left because I felt that everybody else was happy, I'm unhappy, I need to leave. And I found nichiren-shu. And previously, the idea I had of being a nun and following Jesus went out the window when I became a Buddhist because I knew nothing about monastics or anything like that. I had no idea that people lived that life. Don't know why I didn't look, but you know, at that time, who cared? When I became a nichiren-shu member, the first person I met was an American priest. And that did not happen in nichiren-shu. We never saw an American as a priest. And this man became my teacher and ultimately led me down to the path of the priesthood. And it was like coming totally full circle back to this childhood dream I had of being a nun. And what I really wanted to do was to be in service, to really help people. And that was the model that was set by my father, to take care of people, to just be open to the needs of the people around you. So once I became engaged in training to become a priest, my family in Japan still lives there. So I went back and visited my aunt, and she says to me, well, you finally come home. So what I learned was, at that point, that I had been born into a nichiren-shu family. My aunt practices Buddhism and has all of her life, and she was my milk mother. And so she gave me Buddhism, and I had no idea. Because I never understood why this woman would keep saying to me, I breastfed you when you were a child. I'm thinking, okay. Thank you very much. But I had no understanding of why that was so important to her. And so when I left Japan, she was devastated because I was her child. And so today I can express to her my deep and profound gratitude for what she has given me in terms of my faith and practice. That it has continued even without knowledge. And I think it's the same in Pure Land, that the founder of our order decided to share simply the practice of chanting the title of the Lotus Sutra. So Namu, as I said, means devotion, Myoho wonderful Dharma, Renge, lotus flower, and Kyo is sutra. So it's a sutra of the lotus flower of the wonderful Dharma. And he has said in his writings that if you chant one word, one phrase, it encompasses the entirety of the teaching, that you are inputting that into your life constantly. And you might ask, how is that even possible? So from my experience and that of millions of other people who were not interested in education about Buddhism or just couldn't have the resources, is that you could chant these words and things would happen in your life. The misfortune comes about because of, without understanding concepts in Buddhism, with the Soka Gakkai, for example, is that people were attached to their desires. So they would chant for their desires, and then if they didn't receive them, the story became that, well, you don't have enough faith, or you didn't chant enough, or you didn't really want that, and something else was more important. It never asked you to change. And that was a really negative way. There's a lot of negativity in that approach to Buddhism. And Buddhism, we know, is nothing like that. It's because of the beauty of the practice is that it reveals the highest and best that you have within. So once I started to really practice Buddhism and do the faith, practice, and study route, because it's also said that without those three things, there is no Buddhism. You must study it, you must practice it, and you must have faith in it. And a lot of people never talk about the faith aspect, because somehow Westerners don't like faith. It's a bad word. But it is the most profound thing that Buddhism gives to us, is that faith in the teachings and in our own ability to access those teachings. And chanting is just one way. But without chanting, also there would be no Buddhism, because how else did they transmit the teachings when there was no written word? And I imagine, back in Vaishali, when the Buddha was with his disciples and they're chanting the sutras, they're chanting the teachings in order to be able to share them with each other. And then I imagine the monastics who would go out and share these teachings. And the people would be so overjoyed to hear them that they would then support the monastics. And it made perfect sense that the whole system was established for the purpose of sharing the teachings, because they're profound, they're deep. And you don't have to be a scholar. You don't have to be so well read or versed. You just have to practice. And what you find, and I have found with the practice, even when I had no idea of a concept until I read it later, because I had practiced so long without deep study, that when I started to read the Lotus Sutra, for example, I experienced such great joy, because it reaffirmed everything that I had learned through my own experience. That when Nichiren-shu said that you as a female traveling through the night, as long as you have the Lotus Sutra, you will be armed with a lantern in the dark and armed like a demon with an iron sword. So when I had a potentially negative experience with a man that could have turned into a rape situation, I just started to chant, because that's all I could do. I didn't know how to, I'm not strong enough, and he thought I was nuts. So he left. And, other experiences where you really understand that the protection is your life pushing out, sharing the Dharma through your life. And the Buddha talked about the 5 ways of practice of receiving and keeping the sutra, reading it, reciting it, copying, and speaking it as the 5 ways to practice. And keeping it means to live it, to become one with the Dharma, so that everything that you do in your life is a reflection and is fueled by the Dharma. We don't always know what it might say in the teaching, but I think in our lives we know that feeling you have when you are dead on it. Nichiren-shu said that when you are chanting, it's like being a snake in a tube, that your life becomes straight like that tube. Or a plant in a hemp field, that you also stand up straighter because you are in that hemp field. Illustrating the principle of Sangha, that when you are with others who are also doing the same, that you're, all of you together straighten up, your lives become better. And there comes a place, I believe, that when you practice and the chanting connects you to other people, even if no one knows what you're saying, that you can feel the engagement of your senses, your entire body, your mind, everything. And there is that oneness that does happen. Chanting, for me, has become, and I think many, many others, it's a ritual. We have rituals that we lead into how we begin to practice. You know, at home, you clean your altar every day, offer fresh water. And it is a conversation that you are having with the Buddha every single day, every time you chant. And you're also engaged with, the 3 aspects, the parent, teacher, and sovereign aspects of the Buddha. So there are times when I'm extremely troubled, or I might have a serious issue, that I want that parent. I want my father, so to speak. And so when I'm chanting, I can almost feel the times that the Buddha is embracing me and saying, it's going to be fine. You will find the answer. Or I need to study, and so I have that conversation. Or I need to follow one of the teachings that's in the sutra that says maybe, you know, you need to develop more right wisdom or right meditation. All of those things come to us. We can access those during our own conversations with the Buddha. And we also put a sense of rhythm and order into our lives through a regular practice of chanting. And then we also have the potential to experience uplift. And I think that's the one thing that people forget. You know, we didn't come to our faith traditions to sit there and be in the mundane world 100% of the time. We want a place where we can be uplifted out of that drudgery and the muck and all that stuff. And the story in the Lotus Sutra is that when the Buddha taught, that the entire congregation was elevated into the sky. And the Buddha, Tathagata Buddha, opened up the door of the stupa and said, yes, everything you are now hearing is absolutely true. So in our tradition, we believe that every time we chant, we are still participating in that ceremony where we're all uplifted, and it's constantly ongoing. It's like it's going on now. We could just go like plug in with your USB and you're right there. So, and that uplift, I can remember when I was in university that I would be studying late at night, and somehow through the air vents, I would hear chanting. And nobody was there. Nobody around me was chanting, but I would hear that. And it awakened in me this sense that every time you chant, no matter where you are, all over the world, somebody else is chanting with you. That you are never, ever alone. And there's that sense of community that is ever present. Chanting is also a meditation. And people think, especially if you only do silent meditation, that it's impossible to meditate while you're chanting. I hear that a lot. You don't meditate, you just chant. But once you get into it, because you don't have to remember the words, once you know the words, you just chant. And there is this flow that happens. And your mind, your senses, everything is captured by the rhythm, the sound, and the harmony, especially when you're chanting with others. There's something very special that happens. And I have sat silent with people, and I can do it, you know, but I don't like it as much as chanting. I love to chant. And there's something very special about it. What I believe happens when you are fully engaged in chanting, and we chant the entire Lotus Sutra or just specific parts of it. Even when you don't know the words, you're just reading the words, it's kind of like coming in and just coming out of your mouth. It doesn't engage your brain in the sense of you're trying to figure out, what am I saying? You're just repeating these syllables, and then a flow happens. And you know when you're not in flow is when you screw up the pronunciation of the words, because your brain is somehow interfering. And so it's like, okay, I need to get back. The other interesting thing that happens is if you mark where you screwed up, that it's something you need to do, or to think about, or to search in your life. It's always happening that way somehow. It's like your life, and I believe this deeply, that your life is always talking to you. And somehow, when the time is right, when your life is ready, that you will get a message that says, okay, deal with this. We also do chant the sutra in our native languages. So, like I might say, to chant, chapter 16 is Ji ga taka butsu rai sho kyo sho ko sho. In English, thereupon the world honored one emerged quietly from his sorrow. And it's beautiful. You think it would not be, but you can chant very fast in English because it's your native language. And you just put the rhythm with it. And it's a very different experience because it does engage your mind. You know exactly what you're saying. And you could drift off about particular pieces. Most of us prefer to chant in the Shindoku. But it's helpful to chant in English. With my prisoners, we have a service called the repentance ceremony. And it's done in English in a very brisk pace for sometimes 2 or 3 hours of straight chanting. And I can't tell you what happens to these people when they finish the ceremony about repentance. Because we don't really talk about repenting so much as reflecting on what you have done in your life, and to really meditate on that and the awakenings that come out of it, because the words do hit you. Yeah. That people think the world is in a great fire, but in reality it is filled with gods and men. The gods are beating heavenly drums, and the flowers of Mandarava are raining down upon me. It hits you. So the engagement of your entire being is always present and engaged. So that we say it's like your life is a mirror, and so you are polishing the mirror of your life and shedding all that crap, that dirt. And when you do it collectively, it's like being in a barrel of potatoes. You're shaking all the dirt off. And you know the story, and the Buddha said, you know, this guy, I think one of the monks was saying, I don't like this guy. He's always bugging me. He's giving me such a hard time. And he complained to the Buddha, and the Buddha said, I hired him to be there just for you. And we all know that experience. Having someone that you cannot stand. But the things that show up, you know, are for your education and awakening. And the rituals help to elevate everything. There's something beautiful about ritual. And because I was in a tradition before that did not have ritual, I did not realize how much I missed it. And the way that you can celebrate life and grief, you know, that because everyone cannot escape the four sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death. It's going to happen. But it is the grace of our lives that we experience that constantly, even in small scale. And to deal with it through a ritual is very beautiful. And the chanting allows you to express rage, happiness, all of your emotions, because they're acceptable. Many of us often talk about the ability to even laugh as you're chanting the sutras, or to scream as you're chanting the sutras, to express your pain and suffering. And you could do that freely. And most of us would not do that publicly. But in the space of the conversation that you're having with the Buddha, you can do that and let it all come out of your life. And it's such a gift to be able to take that experience, to throw it out there, and receive back the loving kindness and tenderness of the Buddha's teachings. And it's always present. It's like a feedback loop. No matter what you put out, you're going to get back the Buddha's mercy and compassion. It's always there for you. And chanting is such an incredible gift to build a community, because we are often unable to fully express our love for each other, even our pain with each other, because we don't often have the words. But when we chant together, it's kind of amazing what happens, because you don't even have to talk about it. You can just sit and chant with each other. The one beautiful thing in the Soka Gakkai was chanting together, because we would chant together for hours, like overnights, 24 hours, and just chant and chant and chant. Or if we were doing a major activity together, there were parades. I learned how to use a lariat so I could march in a parade. And I could never imagine doing such a cowboy thing, to walk down the road with a cowboy hat, twirling a lariat. I was like, I'm never going to be able to do this. But we would chant together for hours, and gradually I would be able to get this thing going in unison with 30 other women. And that feeling of working together for a common goal is what we call ITZI, many bodies, one mind. Because the target becomes so important to all of us as we're working together. And sitting together very closely chanting, the energy of that chanting, the daimoku, spreads from one person to another. And it becomes a place that you're doing things together without a thought, only because of the rhythm of your lives interacting together. And so you're able to build a community based on shared experience, harmony of your voices, even the tears that you shed together as you're chanting. And that proximity of always being around each other, going through the same hell. And I think chanting together allows you to recognize and appreciate that we all suffer the same. And our suffering then becomes the grit for the pearl of all the wisdom that we gain. And chanting is a way to access that wisdom. I remember chanting with a bunch of Zen priests from San Francisco Zen Center. I have to laugh all the time when you say that, because my memory of the priest there is, we're chanting, so our position when we're chanting is very gentle right here. Zen Center. And so we're chanting 30 minutes, you know, and afterwards, she says, "You guys must have muscles like gangbusters." She said, "I don't know how you do it like that." I said, "Because we don't do it like that. If we're not here, we're here." Because it's a very gentle, but they also loved the chanting. And my friend who's the abbot of the Zen Center often sends her people over to us to teach them how to chant, because they call us the masters of chanting, because they don't quite do it the same way. But we're always engaged. And the percussion that comes along with it, like what we did the first morning, we usually do that at night, so that it's in the dark and it's all by candlelight. And you have this very steady drum beat happening, and it takes you to a different place, totally different place. There's such beauty and joy and connectivity in the act of chanting together. So even as we don't chant the same thing, but I can sit with David and chant with him, and instantly we are connected. And that's a connection that happens and remains no matter what happens. Because it's like, would you say it's like kind of another part of yourself has come to join you, I think. Because we are all connected.
We have different vocal words, but we
Yes.
do chant the same thing.
Yes, we do. And that harmony, that rhythm, that energy, because it's the vibrancy of the action that you're taking. I just seem to feel and have observed that people who chant are much more energetic and vibrant. Even though it's silent chanting, I mean silent sitting, I'm not going to put that down because we use a little bit of it. There's something, a great deal to be said for it. But the stimulation, the charging of your energy and your force is quite powerful. The one thing I always hear from people is, there's something about you. You know, there's something there. And so I truly believe that's the activation of the Dharma. And so that you can heal your life. You know, we talk about the mind-body connection. You can absolutely heal your life. You can heal your body. And I often think it's because we don't accept that we are powerful. And the capacity we have activated by the Dharma is something we've never experienced before. When the Buddha said that your mind is like a garden, to be careful what you plant in it. We plant, most of us, lots of limitations because that's what we've been taught. And a lot of times it's very difficult to imagine that the potential of our brains, of our minds, can be such that we could do incredible things. But we see it in the small ways that we interact, the small ways that we touch each other. I mean, like the little boy this morning in the restaurant at that hotel. And his profound joy to be able to look at all of these different people and touch them. And he was so happy. We can do the same. We have forgotten. And through our practice and the chanting and really feeling the energy, the vibration between us, I'm convinced that's how we know each other. That intuitive feeling that we have of being together with each other is what gets activated. So that you can be with people if you accept it and understand what they're going through and how you can resonate together with them and maybe just open a door. Because that's what you're doing anyway, isn't it? I mean, as therapists, we're all in the same business.
What a helping profession.
Yes.
Helping profession.
And to know that through a practice that you do can enhance and even heighten and awaken the greater potential that we all have. Is it not said that we only use 10% of our brains? Imagine, and we do incredible things with that 10%. And the activation of other parts that just, I guess they call it animalistic part of us that we tend to shut down, the part that connects us. If we had greater awareness, what would happen? What we could do in the world with each other. Create peace, create a better world. And the sound that, I think you said, was the sound that spreads around the world. And chanting can be a common language. It is a common language, especially as we're all chanting the same thing in our various languages. It is still the same vibration. And I used to think, we talk about the vibration of sound. You don't know where it ends because it's just out there continuously. And I used to imagine all these people chanting around the world, is setting up this wave that is constantly moving around the world, constantly. We need to make it bigger because we're in trouble right now. But if we imagine and amplify that we can ultimately save each other and our world. And that's the whole reason we're here anyway, is it not? And I thank you for your attention.
Shall we chant a bit?
Yes.
Yes, 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 yes,
We have time.
yes.
Shall we do the clapping again?
Yeah.
So, everything begins Namu, Myo, negativity out. So, Namu, Myo, Ho, Ren, Ge, Cho. Namu, Myo, Ho, Ren, Ge, Ho, Ren, Ge, Cho. Namu, Myo, Ho,
Namu Myo Ho Renge Kyo. 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 Namu Myo
Find you can't look at each other.
Renge Kyo. Namu Myo Ho Renge Kyo. Namu Myo Ho Renge Kyo. Namu Myo Ho Renge Kyo. Renge Kyo. Namu Myo Ho 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 Renge Kyo. Ho Renge Kyo. Namu Myo 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 Ho Renge Kyo.
We also engage in kind of, you might call it a combat, splitting the room in half and having one chant to the other side, back and forth. Who is louder and stronger?
We have something similar.
It's a lot of fun. Also walking.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Are there any questions?